Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This is James, and today we're going to be discussing my overall thoughts on The Wheel of Time Season 1. Unfortunately, you are not going to get Fedora, as today I just wanted to do a different format to see how I like doing this. Before I begin this discussion in earnest, I feel like it's appropriate to tell you about how I approached this series initially, and then later on I will actually discuss how my thoughts on the series has evolved over time. So initially in the series, the way that I approach this, being a huge fan of the books, I came at this particular series with the very first paragraph of the very first chapter of every single book of The Wheel of Time first and foremost in my mind. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind rose, ... And thus begins every single book of The Wheel of Time. Like I said, this is paragraph 1, chapter 1, every single book. And this book tells us that, there are multiple turnings of the wheel. Things are not always going to be the same. And, things might get misremembered. They turn to legend, they turn to myth, and then they're forgotten. And then things come again. But because it's a different turning, that's just it. It's different. For me, this is a different turning of the wheel. Yeah, some of the names and places might be the same, but things might be combined. Events might take place in a different way, in a different happenstance, all of this. So I tried to just sit back and enjoy the show as much as I could. And thankfully, it was not very hard to enjoy the show. The production quality for most of it is extremely great. And while I do have some qualms and quibbles with it, for the most part, everything about the show worked for me. And thankfully, I found the show to be very, very enjoyable. They kept enough from the books that things kind of felt familiar. But even the things that they changed made sense within the context of what they were doing. Some of the things that I liked the most about this was I love the actors that they got for the characters. As I said, a lot of the characters felt the same. They felt just like they did from the books. And the actors that they got to portray everybody, they were absolutely spot on. Not just the main group of characters, but all of the secondary characters too. In fact, Kate Fleetwood, who plays Liandrin, I hate Liandrin in the books, but I absolutely adore Liandrin in this series. She has been so fantastic. It has been so good to watch. And I like the fact that they kept a lot of the major events from the book and put it into the show. It might not be done in exactly the same manner as the book, but they're still there. And the perfect example of this is one that I mentioned during my recap of episode 2, and that was a speech that Moiraine gives about the history of Manetheren. In the book, it happens in Emonsfield, in the Winespring Inn, which is the inn that Egwene's family owns and runs. And it happens in the show after they leave Emonsfield and as they're traveling and escaping the armies and stuff. And that's just one of the things that I'm talking about. It's like they didn't have to leave that particular speech in, but they did. And I love that speech. That was why I fell in love with the book when I initially read it. It was just that impactful to me. The fact that they kept it in for the show, even if they did it in a different way, that meant a whole lot to me personally. Other things that I'm glad that they kept were things like all the stuff happening in Fal Dara at the end. I'm glad they kept Fal Dara, the ways, Shadar Logoth, all the stuff that happens to the kids or to the main group of characters in Tar Valon and things like that. I absolutely love it. They did a good job of bringing everything forward. And even with the stuff that they changed, most of it, I actually like most of it. The White Cloaks are much more scary and intimidating in the show than they ever were in the books. In the books, they're just annoyances most of the time. Like every time they show up on screen, up to a certain point, every time they show up on screen in the book, you're like, can we get out of here? Can we just go somewhere else and do something else? But another thing that I really enjoyed in the show, one of the major changes was when Lan, Moraine, and Nynaeve were with the Aes Sedai, taking Logain back to Tar Valon. The whole sequence, I really enjoyed everything about that sequence, except the end. The part with Logain and watching Nynaeve heal everybody. I do have an issue with that, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. One of the things that I really did like on this was the way that they did the ending. Now, in the book, like it's no secret. In the book, Jordan doesn't really do endings very well, and a lot of the stuff just ends abruptly. But The Eye of the World was especially egregious with this. Reading through the end of The Eye of the World, like, you know things happened. What happened, you're not really sure, but you know stuff happened. Here in the show, they did a really good job of kind of laying things out so that everything is quite understandable as to what's happening, what's going on, and what the stakes are. And then you find out at the end that the stakes aren't what you thought they were something different, and it worked a lot better in the show than it does in the book. Hands down. No question about that. But even though that there was so much that was enjoyable in the show, there were things that I did not like. Perrin is the main one to come to mind here, because Perrin in the books, Perrin is my favorite character, period. And the way that they changed him in the show, not only do I think it's unnecessary, but what they actually did was just wrong. Totally. There's no redeeming qualities about this. They did not have to give Perrin a wife, only to have him kill her in that first episode. That did not need to happen. I know the conflict, the internal conflict for Perrin that they are trying to set up with that, and to help more easily explain decisions that he makes later on. That's fine. But they didn't need to create a character only to kill her to give Perrin those types of motivations. In the books, Perrin has a family. He has a mother. He has father. He has sisters that you don't ever meet in the book. And spoiler, you find out later that they died. They could have accomplished the exact same feeling for Perrin, set up the exact same motivations for Perrin, and they could have used his sister. They didn't have to create a whole new character for this. Another thing that I didn't like was, I know that there were a lot of issues around episode 7 and episodes 8, and it shows. A lot of it can be forgiven, but there were two things in those last couple of episodes that I just think are pretty unforgivable. One, they set up in the season that the way that Nynaeve was able to catch up with Lan and Moraine is that she tracked Lan. And then in episode 8, she tells him, like, no, I tracked Moraine. It would have made more sense to say I tracked Rand, or I tracked all of the Eamon Fielders. It would have made more sense for her to say I tracked them. These are the signs that you can look for. Honestly, it makes more sense. She's the wisdom of the village that they grew up. In the book, I know they explain that her father taught her how to track and stuff like that. I don't remember at this time, while I'm recording this, I don't remember if they actually explained that in the show. But it would make sense. I know these people. These are the signs that you look for. You know, that sort of thing. And the other thing that I really, really, really didn't like was the scene in episode 7 where they have the high school drama, where they try to say, you know, Perrin is in love with Egwene, Rand is in love with Egwene. That was completely unnecessary and was not set up in any way throughout the entire series. If they would have set it up in any way, then yeah, I could probably understand somebody bringing something up like that, but that they did not set it up in the show at all. This was very much a case of the Benioff and Weiss from Game of Thrones thinking that like foreshadowing is character development and not actually doing anything to develop the character. That was this. This was, hey, we're just going to say this is a thing, but we're not actually going to show anything that leads to this. And then the final thing that I want to talk about what I didn't like about here was, especially in 7 and 8, this was the inconsistent visual language in 8, specifically around the linking and getting burned out. They very clearly show people burning up from the insides, their skin drying out and cooking, and the eyes turning black and smoking and stuff like that. They very clearly show this to indicate that these ladies died, and then they do the same thing with Nynaeve. And then they have Egwene heal her, so it looks like Egwene heals her from death. And that was something that wasn't thought through. And they did such a good job of thinking through pretty much every other aspect of how the magic system works and what visual language they're going to use to show things, that it really feels like they dropped the ball on this. And I know that they came in, some of the showrunners did some interviews later that explained like, no, that wasn't what happened. This is what happened. And that's not something that you should have to do in any show or any medium. If you have to go somewhere else to find out an answer, now I'm not talking about, cool theories and stuff like that. Like, no, if a showrunner or if a writer or something has to come out and say, this is not what happened, this is what happened, that means that you didn't do a good job initially of showing what happened or communicating what happened through visual cues, audio cues, or anything like that. And they did show that they were able to establish a visual language for the show and even an audio language for the show. And that was something that I didn't realize until I was doing my episode recaps, was I did not realize how many times they had the whistle that Padan Fain used in the first episode showing up over and over and over again, usually right before he shows up on screen for the first time of that episode. So they very clearly can set up visual languages and audio languages. They just didn't do a good job in this specific instance. When I first watched the series, when it was coming out in 2021, I loved the first 6 episodes, and then 7 and 8 came out, and I thought that the sum of the parts was very much less than the whole. It seemed like it was building up to something really great, and then episode 7 and 8 came along, and something was lost, something was missing. And I know that there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. They had one of the main characters, one of the main actors did not show back up. Still, nobody knows why he didn't. They were shut down because of COVID protocols, and then when they came back, there was a lot less people on the sets. And there were some things that happened that can be forgiven. But at the time, it just didn't work for me. As I was going back and rewatching everything, I got a better appreciation for the things that they did, the things that they changed. And I think that moving forward, these episodes aren't going to be as bad as I initially thought. And I like season 1 a lot more as a whole now than I did when I first watched it. So that's it. That's my thoughts on season 1 of The Wheel of Time. It is an extremely enjoyable experience even after 2 years and watching it multiple times. It is still a good watch. And I haven't completely changed the way that I feel about episodes 7 and 8, but I no longer think that the season as a whole suffers because of the last 2 episodes. So, thank you everybody for listening to me as I do this. I am going to be talking about season 2 here pretty soon. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do for it yet, but we'll see. Let me know in the comments below. But I think what I want to do for season 2 is once all the episodes air, I want to do a character progression for each character. So follow Perrin. This is what happens to Perrin throughout the whole thing. This is what happens to Egwene. This is what happens to Rand, and that sort of thing. Only because they do flip back and forth for things quite a bit. If you blink, you're probably going to miss something important. But anyways, thank you everybody for coming and joining me for this. I will talk to you later, and you have a nice day.